Martin.
A couple
Oh, there they are. There they are. Oh, there. Okay, there. Are. Okay, great. Good. Hey,
Thor without him.
Thor without them. Good Thor.
Morning, Scott. How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the action agenda of the Commonwealth Transportation Board for the month of July. First of all, thank everybody for being here. Nice evening last night for the arrangements. Appreciate that very much. And so today we're going to start right into the action meeting. The first order of business would be if there's any public comment. And if you'd like to speak, I don't think we have anybody that's signed up, but if anybody would like to address the board, now would be the time to do it. Okay, seeing that none, I do have some comments, but I think I'll wait till we get to all the action items are over with. So that being the case, next up on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the June 20th meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
Move.
Is there a second? Second. Any comments, corrections, or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Okay, I think first up is you, Mr. Kilpatrick.
That's what it looks like. So what I spoke to you yesterday about this agreement, this memorandum of understanding with Virginia Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration, and 95 Express Lanes regarding the connected vehicle work that we're looking to do primarily on 95, but there's a little bit of spillover onto the Beltway, and I asked for your approval of this to authorize me to enter into this memorandum.
Is there a motion for approval? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any comments or discussion on this agreement? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. I think that's, Charlie, new era for VDOT, and look forward to expanding the use of our networks here in the Commonwealth and embracing this new technology. So
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
We picked up some good press both in Northern Virginia but also AP overnight on this.
And I'm comfortable that once we actually kick this off, the governor will be involved because it's great for the Commonwealth in addition for the motorists here. So thank you very much. Okay, next up is Mr. Vlavic, excuse me. Bronco, that's how I know your name. We're up in a few things in the maintenance division. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary, Commissioner, and CDB board members, good morning. I have 3 decision briefings before you today. Decision briefing number 1 is from the Dickinson County Board of Supervisors, Bristol District. Commemorative naming of the bridge on State Route 63, Big Ridge Road, over the McClure River, Dickinson County, as the Klitschko Veterans Memorial Bridge. The Dickinson County Board of Supervisors would like to honor the lives and services of the men and women from Dickinson County that have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. VDOT supports this request.
Mr. Stanton is not here today. Is there a motion for approval? Is there a second? Any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please rise. Thank you. We'll let the record show it was unanimous vote in that regard. Continue, please.
Decision briefing number 2 is from the Tazewell County Board of Supervisors. Commemorative naming of the bridge on Route 1103 Center Street over the Laurel Fork in the town of Pocahontas, Tazewell County, as the Donald R. Rush Memorial Bridge. The Tazewell County Board of Supervisors wants to memorialize the life and ultimate sacrifice of Private First Class Donald R. Rush, who gallantly gave his life in defense of the United States, the Commonwealth of Virginia, Tazewell County, and fellow soldiers during the Vietnam War. VDOT supports this request also.
Is there a motion? Second? Any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please stand. Thank you. Let the record show it was unanimous in that regard.
And decision briefing number 3 from the Warren County Board of Supervisors, Stanton District. commemorative naming of the bridge on State Route 340, North Shenandoah Avenue, over the South Fork of the Shenandoah River, Warren County, as the Veterans Memorial Bridge. The Warren County Board of Supervisors would like to honor the lives and services of the men and women who have served in the U.S. Armed Forces. VDOT supports this request.
Is there a second? Any comments or discussion?
My comment would be, I can't believe we've got a bridge left to name. I really don't.
We're saving one for William.
All those in favor, please stand. We'll let the record show that that was unanimous also. Thank you very much. You know, this, I think, is really an important thing that we do, and just so the Transportation Board the commissioners understand that we can do this for those that have given the ultimate sacrifice. The General Assembly, there's another way they could do that also, and they have much more latitude determining in that regard. But I think this is something that is a very, very positive thing to do in remembrance of those who really have sacrificed to make our community and our state and actually our nation a much better place to be. So appreciate that very much. Okay, Ms. Pryor.
Secretary, members of the board, I have 2 items for you today. The first item is the amendment of one project to the 6-year improvement program. It is an environmental study for the Patriot Center connector in Henry County and Salem District, and I recommend your approval.
A motion. Mr. Rosen, yes. Is there a second? Second. Any comments or discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Pryor.
And the second item is my normal monthly transfers of surplus funds from completed and ongoing projects, and I recommend your approval.
There is, Mr. Tunk, thank you. Is there a second? Any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Ms. Snyder, good morning.
First item I have for your consideration today is a limited access control change. It is in the city of Fredericksburg, and it is to provide for an adjustment in the limited access on Interstate 95 North at Route 3. The adjustment in limited access is needed to provide safety improvements on Interstate 95 and Route 3 interchange. VDOT has reviewed this and recommends this change, and I request your approval.
Honors.
Move for approval.
Second. Any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Snyder.
The next item I have is also for limited access control change. It is for an adjustment in the limited access on Interstate 95 North at Route 606 Mud Tavern Road, and this is in the county of Spotsylvania. This is needed to provide improvements on Route 606 for more efficient maintenance of traffic and to prevent additional congestion. VDOT recommends this change, and I request your approval.
Honors.
Move.
Second. Any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Snyder. We got one more.
One more.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
This is also a limited access control change, and it is for a 100-foot break along Temple Avenue in Prince George County. This is to allow a right-in, right-out commercial entrance.
Mr. Williams? Is there a second?
Second.
Any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please. Yeah, Ms. Hines.
Thank you. I had a bit of a back and forth given our work on access management to try to understand whether this fit into the construct that we had, and was told it didn't, so I just wanted everybody to be clear about that. But I would also like to use this as an opportunity to ask that maybe we can get that work wrapped up with the designation of roads before we get to the end of the year, if that's possible.
Yes. I think the chief engineer, when is he coming back to us, Charlie?
We're We're working with the districts on the list to, I'll call consolidate and refine the list. Ultimately, that will be incorporated as part of VTrans. And Nick might be able to tell us whether, I don't know which piece of VTrans it goes into, but ultimately that's where we had anticipated that it would, this list of, or the routes and the segments would reside.
Okay, so I assume that's got to be adopted this year, Mr. Donahue, so.
Yeah, be part of the policy discussion at the time to perform what we talked about yesterday. The board to look area that might be designated high levels of performance that we want to try and preserve in the future. So that's something that
Okay, thank you. Any more comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Now, thank you, Ms. Snyder, very much. You know, one comment on that, Ms. Hines, after we've taken that vote, I do know this has gotten the attention of some of the legislators, particularly where they, in areas that they may think that would be impacted. So I think it is very important that we have that discussion and lay it out and all the reasons why we're looking at this. And then denoting between what the rights of the commissioner are in terms of safety and the flow of traffic versus the board's overall effort to try to make sure we're using the roadways as efficiently as possible. So I think that's a very important discussion in that. So, okay, Mr. Lawson.
Mr. Secretary, members of the board, I have two items for you this morning. The first item is related to the Garvey Anticipation Note Memorandum of Agreement with the Federal Highway Administration. In 2011, this body approved the Garvey program and the MOA with Federal Highway Administration. As part of that MOA, it called for a 5-year review of the program and a potential revision or update of the MOU, and that is what has now taken place. The 5 years has lapsed. The parties have worked together to revise the MOA. It has gone through legal review, and what we're asking for today is for you to approve the MOA and the Commissioner's execution of that document.
Let's just see if there's a motion. Is there a motion? Is there a second? Second. One comment of discussion, then I'll open it up. This is basically just keeping up with the law, giving us ability to use this program to bring forward federal revenues under this in that. And I think the Commonwealth has used it very wisely in the past and continue to do so. It's a significant part of our 6-year program and the ability to get work done sooner. So, yeah. Any other comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay. Mr. Lawson?
The second item I have before you this morning is related to the I-66 inside the Beltway. I think it was some mention about this yesterday. This project is obviously been approved by you, and we are moving forward to a toll day 1 in December. What we want to do is to make sure we have thoroughly tested the operation and are prepared for toll day 1. And to do this, we feel that we need an additional $2 million of advanced funding from toll facility revolving account.
Tons. Is there a second? Second. Yeah. In terms of for discussion here, and I made the comments yesterday, I believe this is money very well spent here and in Hampton roads, same way. And let's point out that this is coming from the toll revolving facilities account, which means these monies will be reimbursed. And that's what the account was set up for in terms of getting these things going. So yes, it is being used for this, but as I pointed out yesterday, I think from VDOT and the traveling public, it makes a lot of sense that everybody understands, and it's just not just getting it billing and understanding the traffic, but it's also giving time to educate the public on these changes in terms of what Ms. Johnson's doing with her advocate program and in Hampton Road. So these are things that are going to be in place for many years, and there's no sense rushing them. just to say we did it at a specific date, and I believe that, talking with the commissioner, this testing and this outreach is would be very valuable to the ultimate success of making sure this is a positive experience for the traveling public. So that's the justification and why I think we're wise as a board to let VDOT do this. Any other comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so one abstention. Any other abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Lawson, thank you.
Mr. Walton's going to take Mr. Utterback.
Oh, Mr. Walton.
We didn't want Mr. Utterback to drive up all the way up here again.
Let's take advantage of Mr. Walton while he's up there.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. I'm standing in for Mr. Utterback for the next two items. The first is a resolution of the board authorizing the commissioner into an agreement with the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission for the 264 Interchange project. The board had earlier authorized the commissioner into an agreement for the preliminary engineering and right-of-way phase. This resolution would authorize the commissioner into an agreement for the construction phase of that project, and we'd ask for your approval.
Marvin. The second. Any comments or discussion? I'll just make one. It's been a great relationship, I think, between the commissioner and VDOT and HR TAC and moving these projects forward, and just would reiterate, but for, and this is something that we talked about in economic development yesterday, but for the monies that came out of 2313, in the last year of the McDonnell administration, these new monies that went into this region, these projects would not be moving forward. So I think we can stand up and say this is the taxpayers can see the benefit of what's happening in Hampton Roads because of that courageous, I believe, courageous action and bipartisan action taken to invest in infrastructure.
Chairman, what would your estimate be? I couldn't even guess it, of the projects that we have now ongoing in Hampton Roads that would not be.
Well, Mr. Kilpatrick and I were talking about that last night a little bit.
Was that the regional?
But, you know, you've got the 64 on the peninsula, this interchange at 264, the high-rise bridge, the HRBT, the hot lanes, the reversible hot lanes coming on. These were projects that just a few years ago, nobody would have thought, if you'd have gotten one of them going, you would have probably thought you'd moving the ball forward.
Only north of $1 billion.
Yes, absolutely, $7 billion in pipeline. Yeah, and which it would not be moving forward. And that's just not here. You can see the same story in Northern Virginia in that. And therefore, even statewide, even though we haven't seen the same, but without that, there's no doubt that these projects would be going forward. So I just think I think it was incumbent upon us, both the administration and this board, to make sure those monies were used wisely. I would point out they've been competitive bid, and on 2 projects so far, Charlie, you've returned money and used that to further achieve in Hampton Roads, and same thing in Northern Virginia. So just want to point that out, that without those monies and these reforms, I don't believe we'd be having this conversation.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Kozinski.
There's 2 reasons we could even do more if we had a floor. John, did you hear that?
Just to Mr. Williams' question, just on this particular phase of this one project, there's $73 million of HR TAC funds that are just going to this one phase. So I think it's been a great success. I applaud the region for their wise use of the monies in working at the HR TAC and the TPO. I can say the same in Northern Virginia. And I think we're moving things forward. And yes, Mr. Garzinski, I don't think anybody at this table would say if we had more money, we couldn't put it to wise use for their citizens. Any more, Mr. Marvin?
If we rolled HRBT in there, that number is pretty big. Taking that out, you're close to $2 billion, I would think.
It's over $1.5 billion without HRBT.
All right. So, and I don't think HRBT would be built without the participation of HR.
I think you can safely say that several years ago, the people would have not envisioned that this was moving forward and to a reality. And I would say you could safely say that on Interstate 66 in Northern Virginia and other areas. So, it primed the pump, the monies, and I think we've taken advantage of it to use it as wisely as we could. And other parts of the states I can talk about too. I mean, I don't, like or not, 29 is something we're talking about for 40 years. Other projects around the state. I can say from that money and the House Bill 1887, where we realized the formulas to work with smart scale, every construction district in the Commonwealth has received more money and more projects that have been funded to construction than was previously, in many decades in that, particularly after, the diminishment of the 2008 recession and what happened. I just come on this board, and we, in less than a year, had to pull well over $1 billion out of an anticipated construction plan. So, yes, we can all do more, but I think we can stand up in front of the public. You may not agree with everything that we've done, but you can't question that what's been transparent, objectively used, and moving forward with projects in the Commonwealth. And there, so. Okay, any other comments or a discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Mr. Walton?
Secretary.
Thank you.
The next item is a resolution of the board authorizing the commissioner into an agreement with the Virginia Port Authority, where the Port Authority will provide berth capacity at the Richmond Marine Terminal in the event of inclement weather, 50-mile-an-hour winds, blizzard, hurricane, to move our ferries out of the Surrey-Jamestown area upriver to a more protective area in Richmond. And we would ask for your approval of the resolution.
Is there a second? Just to comment on this too, I really, again, applaud Commissioner Kilpatrick and John Ronhart, the Executive Director at the Port. This is just one of many things that they have collaborated on at the tunnel, the Elizabeth River, leasing that to the port, working together. Mr. Kilpatrick's helped the VDOT have done the spaceport, the work over there for the unmanned runway. So we have really tried to utilize and cross-feed all the different transportation agencies working together. And I think, Mr. Kilpatrick, your leadership, I appreciate your efforts in that. You too, Ms. Mitchell, when reaching across, working with other agencies. So, any other comments or discussion? Yes, Mr. Kilpatrick.
This happens maybe once a year, a predicted hurricane that we need to move the boats out of harm's way. Just so that you know, we are in the process of construction of a new ferry that's replacing the oldest ferry. Frankly, I don't recall the name, but it's a 1930s vintage boat that we're replacing, and we expect that new boat, it'll be much higher capacity. I think 70 vehicles will be available in the spring of 18. So just that's what's going on with that. And that project, that's funded and well underway, the construction of the boat.
Any other comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Mr. Walton. Oh, Mr. Walton, don't go, because we can just go back. When we get to new business, I want you to come up and talk a little bit about Shasta. Oh, okay. Please, if you would. Good morning, Ms. Brown.
Good morning. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I do have two items for your consideration this month. The first item number 14, is the approval of the updated revenue sharing program policy and guidelines. As you are aware, a revenue sharing study committee was established earlier this year to review different options that was chaired by Mr. Whitworth. That committee met several times over the last few months, reviewed a great deal of information as well as feedback from localities, and looked at a number of options to address the issues that had been identified. As a result of those discussions, the study committee did recommend a number of policy changes, a couple for the allocations, one to limit the maximum allocation for localities each year from the current $10 million to $5 million, and to establish a limit on the maximum allocation per project to $10 million for the lifetime. The study committee also recommended a number of changes to the transfer policy, including that all transfers in the future will require board approval, either the district member approval or the full board approval, and that all transfers will focus on those projects that need funds for advertisement or award in the immediate future. Last month, the board did give their general concurrence on the policies as presented by the board. After the June meeting, we did send a letter to localities letting them know that policy changes had been recommended and asked them to provide any comments they had on either the policy or guidelines. We did receive comments from 3 localities, and the summary of those comments is in your packet. At this time, we would recommend that the board approve the revenue sharing policy changes as presented last month, as well as the accompanying guidelines, and I would be happy to address any questions.
Mr. Whitworth.
I want to add first a great deal of appreciation to Mr. Rosen, Ms. Hines, and Mr. Malvin, who spent a lot of time and a lot of effort in this review, but none of it would have happened without the capable support from the Local Assistance Division headed by Julie, in addition to Russ Dudley, Debbie Webb-Howell, Bill Dandridge, and also Mr. Walton. I think the board should feel comfortable that this has been a thorough review. It's been a transparent review. Every meeting we allowed public comment. At the end of the day, I think our public, our customers, our communities understand the need for these changes and generally support them. And I think that came about, that evolved with understanding. And I think this board has been certainly kept apprised of the policy, and it's from the policy that the guidelines are derived. Therefore, I make this motion of approval.
Is there a second? Okay, we have a first and a second. Is there any comments or discussion? Yes, Mr. Williams.
I had a couple of recommended changes to this, but I negotiated with the guy that did all the hard work this morning, and I guess I would describe it as a smackdown, so I'm not going to bring it up. I'm supporting the policy changes.
I'm sure there was a lot of discussion on this amongst the board, but also in the hearings and the different things going on. I think it's safe to say this is something the board will revisit again and should revisit again as we go through subsequent rounds of smart scale, but also depending on the revenues that are available for distribution under the various programs. So I only point out, this is not a static situation. After this vote, I think the board has promised to evaluate Mr. Whitworth
5 years, right?
Again, and make adjustments accordingly, which I think is appropriate. Any other comments? Yes, Mr. Malvin.
I think I'd take this opportunity to also give Mr. Whitworth recognition for guiding us through this process. I can tell you he was very thorough, and he did a great job, and we got a good product as a result of that. So.
I was going to wait till we voted to see if it actually happened, but I think that no, we all joined Mr. Whitworth, and I know he did. I can say he put a lot of work in this, and I think that's what it takes to get good policy. And as we talked about yesterday, it's not easy, but not everybody's going to agree, but they all ought to understand where we're coming from, and that's so.
Call it the Whit-Dixon revenue share.
I've been really trying to make sure I said it all correctly, at least through this motion. After that, I give no more credence to what may happen, but through this motion for sure. Any other comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Well, again, thank you, Dixon, very much. Very, very much for the hard work you've done on this, and all the team. Ms. Brown, you too. Thank you very much.
We would also like to thank Mr. Whitworth for his leadership and the full committee. Y'all were a pleasure to work with. Second item I have, item number 15, is a request for recreational access funds. This request was submitted by Louisa County in the Culpeper District. Louisa County owns and operates the Louisa County Aquatic Facility and plans to develop new facilities within this recreational area. The plan improvements will include an enclosure to allow year-round activity. The Director of the Department of Conservation and Recreation has recommended utilization of the recreational access funds to provide adequate access to the park. In his support letter, the Director of DCR indicated that this recreational facility had 12,000 visitors in 2016, but has inadequate access currently, and this project will assist in providing safer access to the facility. The locality will administer the project, and we recommend your approval of this request and the requested $250,000 in recreational access road funds.
Mr. Tongue.
Moved.
Second.
Second.
Any comments or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Okay, Ms. DeBrule is going to come up here. Just one thing I wanted to point out, sort of a procedurally thing. Ms. Hines, I know you sent around some information last night. Probably need to do that either in a work session or in a public setting. It's okay. I mean, we're going to make them all here. But when we have a motion that we've given to the public, we're going to go through them this morning. This is not just want to make sure that we get this in public, and we'll go through it this morning, but probably more in that regard. So, yeah.
Secretary, I do appreciate that, and I think that is absolutely the right way to do it. I would just point out we didn't have a resolution last month.
Okay, so then I guess it was just mailed out before. Is that what happened, Mr.? Okay, so probably should have had a workshop session yesterday, and just have gone.
We had three.
Had it last month. We had. But, I mean, with the resolution, was it at part of the workshop?
I do apologize that the resolution itself didn't get out, but the resolution is verbatim what we showed in the PowerPoint last month.
So let's just make sure that in the future, if there's going to be a resolution, that we make that part of a presentation. I'm not trying to be, I just don't want the public to think that we are not doing everything out there and open. But the record will state, the resolution stated exactly what was presented. On the other hand, I think in the future, we should bring these up either in a workshop or whatever. So just want to make that clear. Again, it's just me making sure that something didn't change, that the public didn't have an opportunity to comment on. So with that, in that regard, then Mr. Brule.
Item number 16 is a resolution for the board to consider endorsement of the principles that the Transit Capital Projects Revenue Advisory Board has been working on for about the past year and a half. This board has been briefed 3 times, December of last year, March, and then as recently as last month, with the principles that are included in the resolution being part of that presentation. I'll also point out that the legislation itself directed DRPT, working with this Revenue Advisory Board that was chaired by Mr. Williams, to produce a report that addressed 2 things. Revenue needs that were identified for transit capital, and also to develop a prioritization philosophy or methodology that could be implemented for transit capital projects. That report is due to the General Assembly in August. We are still working to make it pretty, but the principles themselves have been unchanged for the last several months and have been presented in a public forum through the RAB as chaired by Mr. Williams. So what you have today are the principles, but the report itself, we're still putting the graphics and putting the language together to get that ready to be submitted next month. Staff recommends approval of the recommendations as presented.
Okay, Mr. Williams, is there a second? Second. Okay, now I know there's going to be some discussion, so we've got a first and a second out there. So, Ms. Hines, did you want to go through what you had presented?
Yes, thank you, Mr. And I would say I appreciate that this has been before us before. I do. And as I have done my due diligence and talked to folks in my part of the region, I have continued to hear concerns, and part of that is why I bring these forward today, because I think we should talk about them, whether or not we end up adopting what I've proposed. I think it's important that we have the conversation here at the table. And so I propose two places for change, and let's look first at the fifth whereas, which is the one that talks about the amount of money. I have reviewed that information in the report, and the report basically creates 3 tiers. It says, you know, if we could be at 110 million a year and it would barely fill the gap. We could do 130 million and we could do some very minor expansions. Or if we were really looking down the road, we could be up to 200 million a year to meet the kinds of expansions that we know many are considering to meet their residents' needs in the area of transit capital. And the report lands at the 130. My concern is that that is simply for existing service with minor expansion. We all know that Metro has sort of an unstated number on the range of numbers on the table. This is not addressing the Metro ask, and I think we need to make clear in the resolution that this 130 is kind of, don't give us a lot less than this, because we're going to need this to just do what we're doing and serve the people we're serving. And I think we need to call out that Metro is still sitting there, and that this money does not address the Metro need, nor does it deal with any uncertainty related to the changes in the federal government funding for transit. So I would propose that we change this whereas to say, whereas an evaluation of the Commonwealth's documented funding need to continue existing transit services compared to projected revenues from existing sources has identified an average annual revenue gap of no less than 130 million over the next 10 years, representing a drop of over 40% from existing funding levels prior to any consideration of Virginia's share of additional capital funding to address the needs of WMATA or the uncertainty of continued federal funding. So I would move that we amend that. Is that how you want to do it?
I think that'd be the appropriate way to do that. So you've moved that in the form of an amendment.
That's correct.
We can either ask for a second, or Mr. Williams, is that a friendly amendment, or would you?
I would not consider it.
Would not consider it friendly. Okay, so
I
therefore.
consider her friendly, but I just don't consider that amendment.
So Ms. Hines has put forth an amendment to the resolution. So therefore, is there a second? Okay, now time for a comment and discussion on the amendment to amend. So I'll open it up now for discussion.
My discussion.
Mr. Williams.
Will apply to the. You got to look back at the legislation, who was directed to do the study, what the information was that they wanted to receive from the study. And we put, say myself, I chaired the Senate Transportation Committee for 8 years. We had another member that chaired the House Transportation, Jeff from Northern Virginia, Jim Spohr, city manager, 2 transit really gurus. It was a great body. It did a lot of deliberative work. But the first thing we did was to come to a determination through conversations with the patron of the bill, who's the Delegate Peace, who's the chairman of the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation, to find out exactly what do you guys want. You know, what is the legislature looking for? And we tried to take a very realistic approach about what is the legislature going to consider. And we all felt strongly that what we wanted to send them was the information they needed to identify the shortfall and build from there. We were also asked to give them a menu of ways that they could raise the money. It wasn't our job to tell them how much to raise or how to raise it, but we were supposed to give them what the shortfall is, what the figure would be to maintain the system, and some put us back in the status that we're in before all this money goes away. is really what we're asked to do. And so the commission, like I said, been meeting for a year and a half with all those folks at the table, and all we had great help from the transit community. And they, we took their considerations in all the time. Much of this report reflects what was brought to us by them. So we worked really hard. I think it's inappropriate, and it's certainly not allowed, but I think it's inappropriate that this body would take the product that body produced and rewrite it. If you don't want to endorse it, simply don't endorse it, and maybe we'll have an emergency meeting and consider the changes. But this is the product that board worked for a year and a half on and put together. And at the end of the day, all this comes back to the CTB. The policy changes for the how to prioritize the projects, that'll all be voted on right here by this body. It's not, this commission has no authorization to tell the General Assembly anything. And who knows what's going to come out of the General Assembly. You're likely to get nothing from this. Hopefully, that's not going to be the case. But so we've identified the problems. We did not want to get tangled up with WMATA. If there's any awareness of WMATA in the General Assembly, if they think this is the fix for WMATA, we all know that there's too many smart people up there to even think that. So rather than us tackle a problem that we weren't asked to address, we tried to stick very closely to what the direction we got from the legislation and the discussions we had with the people that were interested in it. And so I'd just ask the board to resist amending the report and simply endorse it or not endorse it by vote.
Ms. Hines?
I appreciate, I do appreciate all
I'm
that.
not offended by any of it.
No, I understand. I think this is a legitimate, and perhaps as someone who's been on the board far fewer years than you, perhaps I misunderstand the purpose of the resolution. But the purpose of the resolution, as I read it, is to endorse or to put ourselves on record as agreeing with everything that is in the report. And basically, we're passing it along and we're blessing this. And my point is, I think this board has some capacity to add a thought or two. And that is what I am proposing. And I very much appreciate that people don't want to get tangled up in the WMATA issue. Having served on that board for 5 years, I totally understand that. At the same time, to the ordinary reader of the resolution, and maybe there is no such thing, it would be easy to not understand that WMATA is not included in that number. And I think that for the general public, that is an important thing. And I think for us to acknowledge that we know that too, in writing on this resolution, is important. So that's just a different take, I guess.
I guess my response to that would be for this board to do a resolution about WMATA and send it to them. And I don't think you'd have any problem getting a unanimous vote on a well-written resolution telling the General Assembly that WMATA is in trouble and that this Transit Revenue Advisory Board, who was not asked to look at WMATA, that they did not address it. And we can send them a resolution, and I certainly will vote for it and move its passage and second it. But
Ms. Valentine?
Thank you. When this was presented last month, I know that there was discussion made about making sure it was clear this didn't include WMATA. And so I'm just asking, as I read it, I would think that WMATA could be included because it says principles for addressing future transit capital revenues. So I would just like to ask Ms. Mitchell, if this is presented, is it clear that this would not include WMATA?
So this does include sort of the existing state commitment to WMATA, and I think that's it. I don't think that's necessarily what Ms. Hines is referring to. This is the additional funding needs that have been identified in recent months for WMATA. There's still a lot of work that's occurring in the region, some of which through Secretary LaHood and the efforts that we're helping sponsor to try to reach a regional consensus on what those needs are. Right now, there's a number of $500 million that's been thrown around, but I don't think anyone has really signed on to that number yet. So that's part of the issue, is that it's not clear yet what that is. So I think the changes, I think the first change that that Ms. Hines is recommending, I think it's consistent with the discussions we had last month. You know, and it is true that this does not contemplate the additional needs that may be coming down the pike for WMATA in the next several months. That, but I will say also, I know there was a lot of discussion last month about trying to make clear that these are somewhat separate issues too. So, it's. Yeah, I think it may be the will of the board to decide to do something separate related to WMATA, you know, after we have some recommendations from Secretary LaHood later this fall that would address, you know, what we think the true funding need is going to be for the Commonwealth, and maybe at that time there's a need to either amend this resolution or to be clear that these needs are over and above what was identified by the Revenue Advisory Board. I think that may be a different way to handle it as well. So,
Mr. Williams.
Building this report, we really tried to keep the political considerations in mind. This is going to be a super tough sell. You know the political environment we live in. It's going to be a super tough sell. So we really consciously tried to keep it as compact as we could, because if we can't get this done, the people that were in that room, recognize what a huge issue that's going to be. And when you start, I mean, you know, if I could write it and think that it was going to pass, I'd tell them we probably need $250 million a year for transit. And we could use every bit of it wisely, every dollar of it. There's no doubt about it. But that's not what we're asked to do. And we're trying to identify the shortfall, build a little bit of incentive into it to maybe grow the transit program a little bit, and give them a menu of items and some principles that we used for them to select, hopefully select from, and they're going to build this package, we're not. You know, some legislator that's very interested in it in the committees, and it's going to go through appropriations and finance. I mean, it's going to go along, hopefully it'll go through a long way. And they're going to build a package and come back to us. It might be $175 million, it might be nothing. But that's how the legislature works. So I think we've done what they asked us to do here. And, you know, we had the discussion yesterday, Mr. Connors and I did, about, you know, this board taking more of a more aggressive approach towards letting it be known how we feel about what goes in the legislature. And I probably don't feel as strongly as he does about that. I've served on the other side. And, you know, I don't know. I think we should all be individually advocates, but we're asked to do something, and we do it, regardless of political considerations, in terms of, you know, promoting, raising additional revenue or anything like that. I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it as a board, but they ask us for this, and that's what we're giving them. And I appreciate Ms. Hines' suggestion. She's doing her job, and I appreciate Ms. Hines, period. But from my personal involvement in this, and the people that were in the room appointed to that commission and the hard work they did, I'd like to leave this resolution intact and get the CTB's endorsement. That's what I asked for.
Any other comments or discussion? I think I should weigh in just a little bit in this, and because actually it was, I think, Mr. Donahue and I and Ms. Mitchell working with the General Assembly that worked on, you know, bringing this, and you mentioned Delegate Peace and others. A couple things from the perspective of just how the form of these things work. I'm hesitant to change without the approval of your board on the resolution. And that's not good or bad, I'm just hesitant in that. I do believe the board has the right to weigh in that, but it's not coming from the board. I think it's coming from this commission that was asked for the legislation to review. Number two, I don't see the real, in all honesty, WMATA is such a political issue. The governor has asked Secretary LaHood to get in for a whole separate. I don't believe there's any miscommunication in the General Assembly as to what the needs of WMATA, at least the ones that are going to be the ones taking it forward in Northern Virginia. So that may be a little more substantive. The first one was sort of more a form over that. But I've also come in relying on staff in terms of, and I assume Ms. Mitchell, the staff went through this same deliberation. I mean, I actually found most of the time the first thoughts of the staff have been the best in terms of communicating. Because we tend to overthink things. So I'm not suggesting that's good or bad. I'm just pointing out I would put those out there as considerations, and that's not, maybe somebody thinks I'm speaking against it or for it. I'm really not. I'm just trying to point out the things that I would view in looking at this. And I do believe there's going to be, quite frankly, a lot of opportunity to weigh in on this and WMATA. So those are just my thoughts in terms of listening to this. And actually, when I read it last evening also in there, Ms. Hines. So just from my perspective, we work very clessly, well, it's going to be somebody else working very closely, but in the past, and that's another thing you ought to think about too, there will be someone else, at least in my case, pushing this forward in terms of the General Assembly out there too. So there's just some thoughts from my perspective. Are there any other comments or discussion on Ms. Hines' amendment? Yes, Mr. Connors.
Thank you. Thank you both, Ms. Hines and Williams. I understand where Mrs. Hines is coming from, and I respect it. Her opinion and her service on WMATA and Arlington County and service to the Commonwealth. But I think Mr. Williams made a good point in making it, keeping this clean. And if we want to do something on WMATA, let's do a separate resolution on WMATA and keep that clean, so that we don't blur the issues. And I respect Mr. Williams' work on this committee, the subcommittee, and his experience in the General Assembly. So I'm going to support his endorsement or his recommendation. Thank you.
Any other comments? Ms. Valentine?
I think this is difficult because to pass a resolution means something. And I've also served in the General Assembly, and I also know how information can be used. And so that's my biggest concern in this, and that whether or not we touch, I don't know if there could be a cover letter or as this is introduced, but I do not think that that figure represents, the title doesn't cover or accurately reflect that this is not addressing our future transit capital revenue needs. And that is my one concern, that it could be used in a way that we don't intend. And that is why the clarity piece of this, and, transit is included, in the work that WMATA has been included in the work. So, even as if there's a cover letter or something that says this is strictly for the transit needs excluding WMATA, I just don't want us, we're passing a resolution. To me, I don't know if it's as clear as it should be.
Let me address that if you don't
mind.
Williams? I don't, that's a good, we draft a letter between Jennifer and myself. I'm going to put a cover letter on this thing when we send the package in anyway. We'll do a cover letter. We'll address some of the concerns that have been brought up today. And just we'll forward it around to the board members if you want to make editorial suggestions or or comments, that's fine. And we'll get a final letter ready. So when we submit it, August, what?
When does this report due?
Date in August.
The report itself is due August 1st. We're still working on the report, itself, the final
We
version.
get a letter like that drafted. I mean, I don't mind telling them that this doesn't include Ramada. They know it, but I'll remind them. I'll include the conversation. We can include the conversation that we had here at the board about the other concerns we might have.
Procedural. Is the resolution required?
No.
Okay. Here's what I would suggest on that. I don't like, I don't want to change the report without the members of the committee that Mr. Williams did endorsing the changes for a resolution. I mean, I just don't think, we're putting words in their mouth on a resolution that they haven't agreed to. So I would suggest we do one of two things. We either agree on this resolution and a cover letter, or that there's no problem issuing this report and then having the board come back in September and offering a resolution. I mean, if it's not required, I mean, we can come back and say we've reviewed the report and therefore the resolution is that we support, or whatever we want to say in the report.
My just sitting here reflecting on your comment, it is not required. But I think it's very important to the board. We've spoke from the beginning, from the commission, that we have the board's endorsement with the report.
I think we have the board's endorsement. The question is whether or not we've agreed on the wording of that. And
without the resolution, we don't have any endorsement by the board.
That's not what the General Assembly asked for. They asked for a report from your commission, and I think we have it. That's why I want to go back to the fact that I do believe it's important to get the board's endorsement. But I don't think that we have to have that. I'm perfectly happy to go through and vote up and down these amendments by Ms. Hines and move forward. I'm perfectly. I think I'm just throwing it, and in light of that, that's another way we could do this, because I don't want to change any endorsement by the board, that your committee hasn't had a chance to say that you would be supportive. The last thing we do is get a resolution, and somebody on Mr. Williams' committee said, I didn't, because they're going to talk, all those people you mentioned, these General Assembly members are going to reach out to. Not all of them, but some of them they are going to say. And we don't want to say, well, that's not what our board committed. Just in the same vein, Ms. Valentine, which you, I'm getting there. Ms. Valentine, what you got there, you're right. I do agree. I think there is they do sometimes use it for other than intended purposes. So either to me, we can come to grips with this resolution and a letter, or we go back and submit the report and have a resolution that's amended. And I think that's the two things, and I'm happy to vote them up and down either way. But before we have that vote, I just throw that out. And if, Mr. Williams, you're not comfortable with that, I'm happy to go through the motions.
I would just restate my preference is this endorsement is the report. I mean, it's outlining the report. It doesn't misrepresent the report or anything. I think we all made it critical. It was a critical path for the commission to have this board's endorsement to send in the report. Remember, this is not a legislative package. This is a report. Information was requested, and we gave it. We were not asked to, we didn't. The request didn't say, "Hey, we want to build a world-class transit system. How do we get there?" The ask in the legislation is, we got a big problem coming up. We want y'all to identify exactly what it is, spell it out for us, and give us a menu of items to try to select from to fix it. And so, to me personally, and I think I think I can speak for the commission members, it's important that this board, it's not even required. We didn't say, well, we got to get the CTB's endorsement. It's something that was important to not just the members of the commission, but to the people that participated from outside TISDAC, what is it?
DAC.
Acronyms. My request would be for the board to take up the motion, which was to pass this resolution, and that we do so.
Chairman.
Yes, with the cover letter. The cover letter is fine.
Let me go to Ms. Mitchell, and then I'll
Just
come down here.
a point of clarification that I've been thinking about as we've been discussing this, and perhaps a path forward. I think that the change that Ms. Hines is recommending to this whereas clause, the whereas clause really does represent more background information, and information that that we all have been considering regarding transit funding. I don't think that the first change that she's recommending would be inconsistent with what's in the Revenue Advisory Board report, because it does acknowledge WMATA as being above and beyond this. And there was a lot of discussion in all of our meetings, as you know, about how to address the other big elephant in the room of WMATA. I think, though, and I don't know if this is going to, when this is going to come up. I know that Ms. Hines may have some additional resolutions regarding.
And entertain that when
they come up,
We'll have to vote that, this one up or down.
Those, again, may actually have the effect of changing the recommendations of the board. I don't think that this one does. And so I don't, I think that this particular first change would not necessarily be inconsistent with what's in the report. So if there's other ones that are coming forward after that, though, then I think we will have to discuss those.
I think there is, but we're talking about this one now, and I think that's good information, though, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Garzinski.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We're in a situation where there's a confluence of events that have a kind of a timeline hanging over us. So we don't have the chance to continue this debate. I think we have to maintain the integrity of the process here. I think that's important. And I do like Ms. Valentine's suggestion that a cover letter with amplification could probably be the best method that we could use right now because of the timeline to portray Ms. Hines' concerns, but keep the integrity of the report that Marty's task force or commission has come up with. And maybe as Jennifer is making the pretty picture, somehow tie a little bit of that language into a further explanation. I think that's our best alternative right now, because we don't have time to send it back. Marty doesn't have time. He's got to deliver it to the General Assembly, and that would be my suggestion, to follow Shannon's advice on this.
Mr. Whitworth?
Of similar thought. To me, I haven't heard anything that says there's anything in this report we disagree with. There's simply a feeling that there may be some additional things that should be at least clarified. So I see no reason why we shouldn't endorse and approve the resolution, which is what the board has asked us to do. And at the same time, I think we can, at a subsequent date, send an addendum missive that explains that there are other additional considerations of this board that were not addressed here because it wasn't asked to be addressed, but there are important items that need to be addressed in considering the entire scope of transit.
Thank you. I agree with the comments that were just made and support Ms. Valentine's suggestion with a cover letter. I would also add that, and especially in light of the comment that Director Mitchell just made in reference to this whereas is background information, and it does say that this is a conservative number, and that's clear in the resolution.
The other comments or discussion? Okay, so where we are, we're going to take a vote. There's a second, and a first and a second on Ms. Hines' motion to amend. So just to be clear, a positive vote would be to amend the resolution A negative could keep, or would be to keep the resolution as it is. So is everybody clear on that? Okay, that being the case, and I think we should probably do a show of hands just to do this. So all those in favor of amending the resolution, Ms. Hines' motion, please raise your hand. Okay, all those opposed? Okay, the motion fails. Okay, so we now back to the original. Ms. Hines, do you have any other comments you'd like to make?
Let me make a comment. I won't make another amendment. I did propose some other changes, given the tenor of the conversation this morning, and I respect Mr. Williams' desire to have a clean resolution that is exactly the words of the commission. I appreciate the suggestion of the cover letter, and it is the thing that gives me some comfort that this board can express a concern about other transit capital needs, which I think will be significant moving forward. We just need to be sure we're clear about that, and that this doesn't represent everything. I will just say for myself that I continue to be a bit troubled by the transit capital funding scenario that this group has proposed. I'm not entirely convinced that it won't result in something unintended, and so I just put that on the record. We've spent a lot of time with various funding competitive ranking sort of scenarios over the last several years, including all the work that TSDAC did to come up with something that we've only been using for 3 years that seems to be working, at least in my part of the state, quite well. So I continue to have concerns about that, and that would have been the change that I would have proposed, and given the conversation, I will not propose it today. But I do want to be on record as continuing to have concerns that will play out well if we are unsuccessful in getting additional money. So I'm deeply concerned about that.
As I've said this before, I think this is going to be a major, major issue this board will have to deal with or without General Assembly action in regard in that. So, okay, so now, just so we're back to the original resolution, as you have in front of you, with no amendments. There has been a first and a second to approve that resolution. Is there any more comments or discussion on that motion?
Just quickly, the cover letter is, we'll circulate it, and everybody will have a chance to see it.
And I suppose it should, well, let's get this, and then I want to talk about the cover letter after that. We'll get this motion passed in that regard. So, any other comments or discussion on the resolution as drafted and presented to you? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So the resolution passes. The cover letter. The cover letter would then be from the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Is that correct?
If that,
I think it would.
The legislation specifies that it's the advisory board that is supposed to submit the report to the General Assembly.
No, but the cover letter about the board, I'm going back to what we said. The commission has given its report. Now the board's passed around. I believe this needs to come from the board. I think it needs to come from the board. The board has discussed this, and in addition to this, then identifies other things to come to your attention, so that keeps your commission clean, and that in that regard. So
I would hope that the cover letter would not be taken.
No. I think that no, not at all. No, and I would, but I believe the cover letter should come probably from myself as chairman, representing the discussion that was had at this board in regards some of Ms. Hines' concerns.
That's the cover letter to.
Yeah,
the resolution. That's exactly
the resolution. To the resolution. Your report goes to the resolution. So I would ask you, Ms. Mitchell, to draft that letter coming from, as chair, and draft and have hit Mr. Williams' committee, if he wants to share it with, look at it, and the CTB to make sure it addresses those issues and not, being adverse. I don't think anybody's being adverse, as Mr. Tunk said, to the commission, but I think it's just pointing out other considerations, not in any way opining. We endorse what the commission did, other considerations.
Yeah, we would be happy to do that, and I do want to note, first of all, I thank Marty and the Revenue Advisory Board for all the work that they've done and all the consideration that this board has had. The resolution and the report does contemplate a role by the CTB in the future on with these issues, and so that's why I think it is important that we have. That's why we felt strongly about bringing a resolution to the CTB to support these policy principles, because they do specifically address a role by the CTB in determining a process for allocating funds in the future. So,
I think that would be very much appropriate in that. So, okay, so we will do that, and before submission, we'll have the letter for all of you to take a look at. My letter to go along with the resolution. Okay. All right then. I think that was actually a very productive discussion in that, and these. I've said all the time, some of these things are tough that we have to deal with, and I appreciate the input and the discussion of the board in that. Mr. Solis, good morning.
Good morning, sir. I have one project to bring before the board today. This is I-64 Widening Project. We're going to add a new lane both directions between exit 200 and 205 in Henrico, New Kent counties. We had excellent competition. As you can see, all of the bids were below the estimated construction costs. We think it represents excellent value, and we're recommending award to Corman Branch, a joint venture.
Yes. I'm sorry, Ms. Solis. So are we going to take these in a, is there just one? So
just one, sir.
If you would, then Richmond District, Mr. Williams.
Adopt this.
There is a motion for approval. Is there a second? Any comment or discussion?
Mr. Secretary?
Yes, Mr. Kilpatrick.
This is a smart scale project. It was one that we were able to reduce the original budget amount in order to fit within, I believe it was round one of smart scale. As Mr. Solis said, great value, and one of the commitments of Governor McAuliffe was working to complete the widening of 64 between Richmond and Hampton roads. We've been working west out of Hampton roads, and this is the first project heading east in the other direction. Again, we're real excited about this, getting this project underway.
Just to add a little wrinkle, we're going, we're heading east now. And these projects are usually driven by the MPOs. Well, there's a gap on 64 where there's no MPO. That's when this board is probably going to have to propose a project, because
Or it could be submitted by locality too.
locality
could submit it, yes, in that.
we just down the road. We're 10 years away from it, but at some point you're going to have to.
Maybe not that far.
Gap there.
Yeah, and because, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I've responded to this quite a few times about smart scale and all this. The way, first of all, we certainly can bring this up, and it would be, I think, at-large members. This is a perfect example where an at-large member or anyone else, but I mean, we could look at this and say, here's something that we need to consider. But, also could be a locality. The localities, I mean, I talked with Delegate Peace about New Kent can certainly submit this also, and it would still, in that regard. So that's that. So that's sort of the form. I agree with you, Mr. Williams, the form. But the way it's going to work, the way Smart Scale works, is that as we do this, and I see it as I travel, you're probably going to move some of the issues on 64 to different areas. And what's going to happen? That's going to move that project scoring piece up. I think it's going to work exactly the way that we envision it working. In that, even if we gave them the money today, Mr. Kilpatrick couldn't have the whole 70 miles under construction. It would kill him. because of the delays and stuff.
Somebody would kill him.
Somebody would kill him. So I'm glad you brought it up, but I wanted to point out that I think that is exactly this process and this format, what we have. I think we've accounted for those type of issues. And as I said before, the overriding policy, I don't think the board should be submitting projects over and over again and then having to approve them. But it certainly is the role of the board. Whether it's 2, I don't know, it might sometimes be 10, I don't know. When you look and see on these corridors of statewide significance, significantly in there, a gap, that's absolutely the role of this board.
This piece here,
yeah.
Travel 64 enough. I know you
yeah.
is one of the flashpoints. Yeah. All the,
yeah.
295 pouring into it. And so this is going to, the rest of 64 is not the flashpoint. You don't get into to big traffic jams in there, but this piece is. This will do a lot for anyone traveling.
Well, but I will remind you, 64 is not the only interstate that we have where we have expanded lanes and then we go down to 2 and what have you. I mean, I could choose 81, I could choose even 95 in some places in that. And I wish we had billions of dollars, so we're going to just go all out them all. But as we talked about yesterday, I think we have the best program in place for these limited resources that the real needs come up to the top. And as we build stuff and correct stuff, other needs are going to pop up. I think that is the whole beauty of the system. Now, I'll finish on this and we can vote. None of this ever said that we ever give up our brains. I mean, that's everybody said, oh, it's not, no, it's a tool to help you better, and you got to say, if I want to deviate, but I can tell you that's a pretty good reason for deviating, quite frankly, for me, in that regard. So that's, again, the key I want to point out. This has not become just tick off the box. It never has. But now it's actually telling you, giving you tools, and you can make, I believe, better decisions. But at the end of the day, you guys could take, if you wanted to, smart scale and everyone say, hey, we looked at it, but we're going to do this. The law allows you to do that. You might have to defend that in that, but my point is, never did we ever intend for this to give up, in fact, the authority or the brains of the CTB. It was always meant to help them more in that. So now, I was much more long-winded, Mr. Siley, than you thought was going to be just on getting this contract done, but I only have 3 or 4 more meetings left, so I got to get everything I can in there. So, any more comments or discussions? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you, Mr. Siley. I'm going to do something a little bit irregular here. We have an individual who wants to make a public comment to the board that was not here, and so I'm going to open back up public comment to those who want to speak. We have Ms. Guthrie here. Ms. Guthrie, are you here? Okay. Thank you for being here. I remind you, we're limited to 3 minutes, but please, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Secretary Lane and the board. I'm Lisa Guthrie, Executive Director of the Virginia Transit Association, and just wanted to say that we have been following the work of the Transit Capital Advisory Board very closely, and we thank Chairman Williams and the rest of the board for their work on that, and the TSDAC members who have provided input into that, the DOPT staff, and the consultants on behalf of our transit members. And they've been looking at a lot of reports. They've been engaging in a lot of data gathering and hours of discussion, and I think you can see that it's very important work. So we know that the work's not going to end this summer. We know that our big heavy lift is going to be with the legislature. So we hope to help turn these recommendations into legislation and budget items. So we're prepared at VTA to amplify the message, and not only with our members, but with legislators and also with local governments and business leaders and transit riders and others in our communities. We've been working with VACO and VML to try to elevate this issue with them. We have a meeting with VML tomorrow on that. And certainly we encourage members of Go Virginia and the business community to also join the chorus here. So for economic mobility, environmental, and congestion mitigation reasons, it's critical to all Virginians that our public transportation options remain viable and that we can expand growth and increasing demand for mode choice. And so, so I will curtail the details of the report, but just to thank everybody for your work on that and look forward to joining together and moving this forward to a legislative outcome that will move us forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Guthrie. Since we're now again back into public comment, is there anyone else that would like to make a public comment? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much, and appreciate, Ms. Guthrie, your comments on that. Okay, a few things. I see my Deputy Secretary, Ms. Johnson, is here, and so I would ask her, and if you want to, Mr. Walton, if you want to give us an update on SASTO. Okay. Good morning, Mr. Walton.
Eyes in the back of your head.
As the Secretary mentioned, VDOT is hosting the Southern Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials in August in Norfolk. The dates are August the 13th through the 15th. I believe all you all have been invited. We've heard from several of you who are going to be attending, and we appreciate that. And the rest of you, if you have not let Carol know, if you could let her know, as hotel rooms are becoming a premium. We have several hotels already sold out, but we will try, and I'm sure we can find accommodations for you. It's going to be a very informative and fun conference. SASTO is 13 states and Puerto Rico, stretching from Texas to Virginia. Right now we have about 800 folks registered. We expect to get close to 1,000 by the time that the conference begins. We will hopefully have the governor will be speaking, as well as some other surprise guests and speakers, some technical sessions, and we would encourage you to attend if your schedule permits it.
Mr. Kilpatrick, want to say a few words?
Yes, if I could offer regarding SASTO. SASTO is one of 4 regional subgroups of AASHTO, the American Association. At the national level, that organization has policy documents. They also have guidance documents, and basically a lot of the how-to in terms of building roadways and some consolidation of standards and things like that. But SASTO is one of the regional entities. We meet annually for this event, and there are more technical sessions. There's less business meeting, which occurs at the national level. This really are technical sessions and opportunities for the states to show and tell and share some of the good things going on in their states regarding transportation. We tend to have a stronger relationship with our SASTO members. We have similar road networks, South Carolina, North Carolina specifically, but others. So it's a good opportunity for us to share information about transportation. And frankly, for Virginia, it's an opportunity to show off a little bit and show the great things going on in Virginia in transportation, but also what a great place it is to come visit and spend a bunch of money. So we look forward to hosting this event.
Okay, any questions or comments? It's in Norfolk, right? You said, yeah.
It's in Norfolk. It's going to be held at the new Hilton Hotel, the Main, downtown Norfolk. The Marriott Waterfront is co-hosting, as well as the Sheraton Hotel. There are the 3 primary hotels that folks will be staying.
Okay, thank you very much. Any retreat, anything, Ms. Mathis, that I think everybody knows, 21st, 22nd of August. We'll have a dinner that evening at Wintergreen. I think Ms. Valentine made an excellent suggestion yesterday as during the reception, cocktail reception. I think you'll have representatives from Nelson County there, part of the state, that they'll get a chance to tell us a little bit about Nelson County while we're there. And then we'll have a retreat the next day. I would expect sometime between 2 and 3 we would wrap up. I do point out again, you might get some a questionnaire in advance about some things to consider on that. So I think it'll be a nice day. We can really take some time and really talk about not only some of the things that my staff and I think you ought to consider, but we want to hear from you, I mean, obviously, in that. And I don't think that's the end of it. I think one retreat, but at least it's time that we can sort of have free-flowing dialogue and how, really talk about how you govern yourselves and interact with the agencies, interact with the Secretary's office, and what should be expected, because at the end of the day, it is your responsibility for the allocation of these resources in Virginia. And I think that's a pretty big monumental shift to where it's been, at least in the last couple decades anyway. But I think exactly what the law intended when the General Assembly gave you this authority. And that's any other comments or discussion? Yes, Mr. Tong?
Thank you. I just wanted to let the board know that on July 6th, the governor came to Albemarle County to celebrate the ribbon cutting for the opening of the 29 solutions projects, and just really want to thank the board and the governor's office for the support of these projects, and specifically VDOT's support for the advisory panel work that was done to ensure that the outcome of these projects were the best possible for the county and the traveling public. So I've heard nothing but positive things about each of the projects. We've got one leg of it that is still left and still under construction, the Hillsdale portion of it, and I understand that
the city of Charlottesville,
managed by the city of Charlottesville. And VDOT is starting the work on the adaptive traffic signals, and I understand that that is coming along very nicely as well. So thank you.
Yep, when we first started this project, we had a lot of criticism, and we've actually heard from some of the most harshest critics that have changed their opinion of the project. Hydraulic road at you'd have said that 3 years ago, somebody would have punched you in the face, and now they are asking to continue moving in that direction about how they can coordinate that in, and Mr. Kilpatrick and his team are going on that. And most importantly, it set a lot of standards, I think, for us to shoot for, not only the completion times and all that magnificent job done, because I point that out because one of the things that VDOT and ourselves hadn't really taken into account when we look at a cost benefit is the cost to the public to be disrupted. We put in there all the time it's going to cost in the contract, but nowhere do we say in there, what does it really cost to be disrupted in your lives? It's hard to quantify. All I know is the sooner we get in and out, the better. And VDOT did an excellent job there, incentivized the contractor, and I believe that's some of the best money they spent. I'm glad they got every nickel of it. Mr. Kilpatrick went up and gave them the check. They deserved every nickel of it, and I think that was a great deal for the citizens of the Commonwealth. But it's also now being used as a model as how we did outreach. And involving the public, not only during the beginning of the project, but all the way through construction. We're doing that on 66. Ms. Johnson is now taking the place of Mr. Shuket. He was the one who was doing it up there, but Ms. Johnson is doing that on 66 as a consumer advocate program. We'll be doing that in Hampton Roads on these other projects as we introduce. I think we learned a lot that accepting criticism, some of it is hard to listen to, but quite frankly, some of it really made that project a lot better in that. And constructive criticism, these are tough projects. Whenever we build one, somebody's life gets interrupted. So whether it's your home or your property or your inconvenience, you have to understand that they are, and so to minimize that is a huge benefit to the citizens. So thank you, Mr. Tonk. I think the governor was very pleased to be there, and I should have mentioned yesterday too, the support and leadership we received from Governor McAuliffe. I mean, think about this, and not only on the projects and standing behind us and tackling those, but you get a 4-year term, and your Secretary of Transportation comes in and says, we're going to put in this new process, and you don't get to make any decisions on projects for 2 years. Now, how many governors you think would say, hey, that's a good idea, because we're going to stop the process and go out and implement smart scale? Oh, now, he isn't for it, but I mean, just think about the political, I know his policy staff are saying, wait a minute, you think that's a good idea? And Governor McAuliffe did choose governance over politics. He did it every time. I can only speak to my relationship with him. Every time he backed, and in the face of harsh criticism on 29, he continued, and there was a lot, he continued to support. So I just think that he allowed us to do all this stuff. And I think that goes unsaid, from many times that you got a 4-year governor, you want to get something done, and to allow him to, get this board, giving up his ability to remove somebody. I mean, those are things that are very important that don't get recognized enough. So hats off to Governor McAuliffe for his leadership in transportation in the Commonwealth. Okay, anything else? Yes, Mr. Connors.
Jim, just wanted to say we had a great meeting this morning at the Innovation and Technology Subcommittee. Proud to say that we're moving forward due to the hard work of staff with a soft launch of a data portal. I recommend maybe we have a demo at our retreat, not so much in the technical aspects of it, but the opportunities that are embedded in the releasing of this data. As you know, data analytics is huge. There's a huge desire by industry to get a hold of data and to monetize it and to come up with solutions and new companies and new businesses. So we're moving in the right direction, and I want to thank Charlie and his staff and everyone who had a hand in moving this forward. It's a soft launch right now, should have a hard launch later this month. So I just want to commend staff for their hard work.
Okay. Nothing else, then we will stand adjourned. Thank you all for coming, and look forward to seeing you. I guess next time will be some of you at Sasto, and then some, and then of course the rest at Wintergreen at the retreat in August. And then just a quick reminder, in September.